Ever scroll through like a comment section online and just think, wow, how did the conversation even get here?
It can be a real rabbit hole.
Yeah. Today we're tackling that feeling with a deep dive into one of the most talked about conflicts, probably ever, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah, and we're not just skimming the surface here. We're going
Oh,
deep
dive.
into
It's
an
so
online discussion.
with all the raw opinions and everything.
Exactly. It's actually called Foreign Minister is Done with This st.txt.
Okay, so right away,
Catchy title, right?
yeah, you know it's going to be a wild ride. But seriously, this is a gold mine of different viewpoints, all sparked by this clip, of Jordan's foreign minister at the UN.
I always saw that one.
He basically said that 57 Arab and Muslim countries have got Israel's back, but, like, there's a condition, right?
A pretty major one.
If they agree to a two-state solution.
Based on those pre-1967 borders.
And that's where the comment thread explodes.
That's the powder keg.
Right. So our deep dive mission is to try to untangle all these different viewpoints, what keeps coming up again and again, and maybe try to understand why peace is so elusive for them.
It's a huge question.
Okay, so breaking down the Jordanian foreign minister's proposition, he's saying there's a united front ready to guarantee Israel's security in exchange for a Palestinian state based on those pre-1967 borders. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
We see, the thing is, pre-1967 borders is a bit of a loaded term. See, after the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel took control of places like the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem. The international community considers these occupied territories, and Palestinians see them as part of their future state.
So this whole discussion hinges on where they draw the lines on a map.
It's a big part of it.
Okay. No wonder people are fired up. And that's got to be why those terms, 1967 borders and two-state solution, they're like buzzwords in this thread.
They're everywhere. But here's the other thing. Not all the commenters actually believe this whole united front thing that the foreign minister's talking about.
I was just going to say, I bet not everyone's buying that he can speak for the entire Arab and Muslim world, right?
You got it. A lot of skepticism, especially when it comes to Iran. Some people are like, hold up, he can't speak for us.
Why Iran, though? They're always in the news, but to be honest, I don't totally get it.
So Iran is complicated. First off, it's not even an Arab state.
Oh, that's right.
It's Persian, and it's mostly Shia Muslim.
Yeah.
They have their own history in the region, which often conflicts with other Arab nations.
So it's like another layer of tension on top of an already tense situation.
Yeah, and then you add in all the historical baggage that comes up.
And there is a lot, from the sounds of it.
We're talking about the Six-Day War, the Oslo Accords, Camp David.
You practically need a history textbook to follow this thread.
You really do.
Yeah.
But they're not just events, they're emotional landmarks that still shape how people see things today.
Okay, let's dive into those a bit. I mean, I need a little refresher myself. The Oslo Accords, Camp David, why do they keep popping up?
These were major attempts at peace deals.
Right.
The Oslo Accords were signed in the 90s. It was supposed to be a roadmap to a two-state solution, with Israel slowly giving control of some areas back to the Palestinians. Camp David was even earlier. Another attempt at finding some common ground, but
Neither one really stuck the landing. So they tried to make peace, but it didn't really work out. What went wrong?
oh, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has their own version, depending on who you ask. But the point is, these past events still really affect people today. They color how they view the current situation. Imagine trying to talk about today when everyone's still fighting about yesterday.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's like that.
And judging by, well, even the name of this thread, it seems like people are still pretty fired up about yesterday. I'm seeing some pretty strong language, like terrorists and genocide.
Yeah, and that's a big part of why peace is so elusive, right?
Scary.
When people use these really loaded terms, it's almost impossible to have a productive conversation, let alone find any common ground.
Yeah. Like you said, common ground's important. It's like those words just shut down any chance of understanding. I mean, I get why people are so angry. The recent attack, that October 7th one, that keeps coming up.
Right.
And then there's the whole situation in Gaza, which I can't imagine is easy to talk about calmly either.
And that's what's so frustrating. It creates this vicious cycle. One side points to some violence and says, see, this is why we're angry.
And then the other side's like,
And the other side says, well, this is a consequence of our suffering.
it's a tough one.
Incredibly complex not to untangle.
Yeah. And on top of all that, there's that whole other thing with Iran potentially being involved as well.
Right. This thread is like a pressure cooker.
With a lot of vents.
Letting off steam everywhere. Like that comment about Iran wanting to nuke Israel. That's going to get a reaction.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole drone strike thing, just adding fuel to the fire for some people.
Okay, so back up a little bit. How does Iran even fit into all of this? Don't they have their own thing going on?
They're not exactly next-door neighbors,
Right.
but they still have a huge influence. Iran's been a major player in the Middle East for a long time.
Okay.
And their relationship with Israel,
Complicated.
complicated is putting it mildly. Let's just say there's a lot of bad blood,
Okay.
fueled by ideological differences and this struggle for power in the region.
So, like, SparkNotes version, what's the deal?
Okay, so Iran supports groups like Hamas, which controls Gaza, and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Right.
Now, Israel sees these groups as terrorist organizations.
Okay.
So for some people in this thread, Iran is like the bad guy, lurking in the shadows, pulling strings, making peace impossible.
So it's like everyone is looking at the same situation
But they're seeing completely different movies,
with different heroes and villains.
but different endings.
And then on top of that, you've got this whole other layer of suspicion and distrust about what's real and what's not.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the internet in a nutshell, right?
It's everywhere, but in this context, it's really something.
Because fake news isn't exactly unique to this conflict, is it?
True, but it adds another dimension to everything. You see accusations of propaganda all over the place, people wondering if bots are manipulating things. It's like, can you even trust what you're seeing anymore?
It's very meta.
Very meta.
Because this thread is like the perfect example of the problem that everyone's arguing about in the thread. This whole like self-aware loop of distrust.
It really is. Like, trying to have a rational conversation in a hall of mirrors, you know?
Where everyone just sees their own side reflected back at them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where understanding the historical context is so crucial.
Yeah, because it's not just about today, is it?
Not at all. Take the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, for example. Palestinians call this the Nakba, which means catastrophe.
Because
It led to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being displaced.
Okay, yeah. I can see why that's a sensitive topic.
It's more than sensitive. It's this, like, collected trauma. And it feeds into the whole debate over the right of return, which comes up a lot in this thread.
Right. Right of return. I feel like even I need a refresher on that one.
Basically, it refers to the demand by Palestinians, descendants of those displaced in 1948, to return to their ancestral homes in what's now Israel.
Yeah.
But for Israelis, that brings up all these worries about their own identity and security.
So you've got this deep-seated trauma on one side and then this fear of being overwhelmed on the other.
Exactly.
Yeah, that does not sound like a recipe for a good time.
Not at all. It's a recipe for stalemate.
Stalemate.
And it shows why understanding both sides of the story is so important. It's not just about dates and facts. It's about how people actually lived it, how they experienced it, how they remember it.
Right, because those interpretations are going to be different.
Totally different.
Okay, so walk me through that. How do each of the sides view something like, let's say, the Oslo Accords? Which, by the way, didn't those fail?
Well, even the word failure is subjective.
Right.
Some people see the Oslo Accords as this huge missed opportunity for peace. They'll point to Israel's continued expansion of settlements in the West Bank. Like, see, they weren't negotiating in good faith.
So from that perspective, it feels like a betrayal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you've got other people saying the Palestinians rejected a generous offer at Camp David, and that it's actually their leadership who's to blame for the peace process collapsing.
Well, there you go. It's like that old saying, 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth.
And you see those different versions of the truth battling it out in this thread, all fueled by emotion and a ton of suspicion.
And of course, we can't forget that whole thing with Iran and the alleged drone strike,
Right.
adding even more fuel to the fire. People are pointing to that as evidence that they can't be trusted.
It plays into this narrative that there are these puppet masters behind the scenes.
Yeah.
These hidden agendas, outside forces making peace impossible. Like Iran supporting Hamas. Some people see that and say, see? They don't want peace at all.
They just want to keep things going.
Keep things going, exactly.
It's like that one commenter who was just like, man, religion is so destructive. Like, it feels like religion's a part of this too, which, in my experience, never ends well.
It's another layer of complexity, because this conflict often gets framed in these religious terms, both sides claiming some divine right to the land.
Of course.
And while religion is definitely a factor, it's also important to remember how easily it can be manipulated.
Yeah. Used as a tool to get what you want.
Ex-
It's a good reminder that this isn't just about politics or territory. It's also deeply personal for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Even spiritual.
Which makes finding that middle ground even harder.
Way harder. And this all circles back to that whole information warfare thing we were talking about.
Right, because now we're in the digital age and things are different.
Things are different.
So are you saying some of these people might be bots?
Not necessarily.
Or like paid trolls just trying to get a rise out of everyone?
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But social media has definitely become a battleground,
It has.
for sure. And when you're talking about something as emotionally charged as this, misinformation can spread like wildfire.
So how do you even know what's real anymore?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
It's about thinking critically, checking your sources,
Doing your research.
doing your research. Yeah.
Considering different perspectives.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Like that one commenter who said everyone should read books from both Israeli and Palestinian authors.
Right. Hear both sides.
That's how you learn. Get out of your bubble and actually try to understand the other side's story, even if you don't agree with it.
Even if you don't agree with it. I like that. It's like that other commenter who said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, they couldn't believe how anyone could pick just one side or the other.
Yeah.
Like both sides have done terrible things and both sides kind of have a reason for doing those things.
Right. And that's a powerful statement because it acknowledges the humanity of the other side.
It does.
It says, I see your pain.
Yeah.
I see your perspective. And that is where real dialogue and hopefully lasting peace begins.
It's acknowledging that it's not always about right and wrong. It's about different experiences and different interpretations of, honestly, a very complicated history. It's like this thread is a microcosm of the whole conflict, isn't it?
It really is.
It's messy, it's emotional, there's no easy answers.
And
And yet-
we have to try, right?
We do.
Because behind all of this, the arguments, the accusations, there are actual people,
Living this every single.
whose lives are directly affected by all of this.
It's easy to forget that when you're, scrolling through a comment section online.
It is.
But you're right, these are human lives we're talking about.
And that's why that comment about both sides having, decent reasons, even though what they've done is awful,
Right.
that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that empathy isn't about saying, oh, it's okay.
Right.
It's about trying to understand.
Why they did the things that they did. Even if you would never do those things yourself.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the first step
It's a start.
towards breaking the cycle. If we can see the other side, even if we don't agree with them as human beings. But I gotta say, after this deep dive,
Yeah.
it feels daunting.
It is daunting. It's so much easier to just throw up your hands and say, that's just how it is. Nothing's ever going to change.
Right. But that's not helpful, is it?
Not really.
So where do we even begin? What's the takeaway from all of this?
I don't know if it's about having the answers.
Okay.
Maybe it's about asking the right questions.
Which are?
Like that comment about reading books from authors on both sides.
Right.
That's a good starting point.
So making that effort to hear different perspectives, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Especially if it makes us uncomfortable.
Because sometimes the truth is uncomfortable.
It really is.
And maybe peace, real peace, isn't about this destination that we arrive at.
It's a process.
It's a process. And it's ongoing. It's messy.
And it's hard.
It's a lot harder than just drawing lines on a map, that's for sure.
100%.
So maybe that's what we leave people with today. If this deep dive into a single online comment thread has shown us anything,
Yeah.
it's that even the most complex
The
problems
ones that seem impossible.
are ultimately about people and how we choose to treat each other. So how are you going to show up in the world? How are you going to bridge those divides, even in small ways, and create a more peaceful future? Food for thought.
Lots of food for thought.
That's it for our deep dive into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep diving deep, and keep those minds open.